All right, welcome everybody to the end of the year Leptos holiday stream. Whatever holiday you celebrate / New Year's, we're basically talking about the end of. It's going to be a casual stream. It's just going to be Greg and I this month. So this is also kind of the December monthly / end of year / holiday / New Year / pre 2025 stream. It's going to be a Q&A, AMA format. I know Greg's got one demo he's ready to show. I tried to get a demo going. I'm pretty bummed out about it, Greg. I've got a project that's, not an insignificant project. It's got a lot of moving parts. It's obviously server-side rendered, Surreal DB, on Hetzner, and I was breaking it all out into workspaces, and I was going to do a workspace demo to decrease compile times. And then I've never done that before, just to be honest. And afterwards, I was like, wow, I don't even know if I actually decreased my compile time or not. I can't really tell.
Oh no.
And I think it had to do with like dependencies. Like if one crate depends on another crate, then changing something in one crate will automatically just every single time trigger a compile and I guess it's parent crate, or the crate on which it depends. Mm-hmm. And anyways, so I don't fully understand. At least I don't understand it well enough at this point to feel comfortable demoing it publicly on the internet for all of eternity. So maybe in the future, but
right.
But it was fun. I learned my code base a lot more. It's always fun to it's always fun when you're really deep into code to have an opportunity to just like step back a little bit and zoom out and just take a look at the whole architecture of your entire code base, which normally, I guess when you're developing, you're usually, maybe it's just me, but I always feel like I'm working over in this little corner of it, and then I'm done, and then I jump over to some other little corner and I'm over there for a little while. And it's nice to do something like breaking it, having a workspace and breaking it out into crates. It's nice to kind of take a step back and look at how your entire code base is structured and have a chance to kind of just reorganize everything and clean house. I don't know if you have that experience as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, because you can't keep the whole thing in your head, right? And so like somebody made a PR that I was reading through yesterday, adding some features to the server function macro. And as part of that, they were like, oh, I just needed to refactor this too. Cause it was like, it was probably one of these things that grows over time. And it was like 1,000 line function to do all the macro stuff. They're like, I just broke this out. And I was like, that's great. Like the new features look awesome. Like, let's figure out this and that API and whatever. But like, I don't know how that macro works anymore. So I feel like in order to read, it was one of those things where you click on the diff in GitHub and it's like too big to show it to you. And I was like, okay, I feel like I need to go and I need to relearn how it works right now and then read through the refactor to understand. Because yeah, exactly. I know whatever thing I'm working on right now, but not like everything. So you have to go back in, refamiliarize yourself, figure it out. But then once you do that, it's like, oh, here's this pattern that I'm doing 3 times. Why don't I make that into a function? Because every time you do it, you're just like, I'll just throw this in here really quickly or whatever it is. So it is a nice opportunity. You kind of get some refactoring in.
Yeah.
I'm curious on the workspace thing, right? Like, I mean, we can talk about this more later too, because I assume that I'll either talk about it or people ask questions or whatever about like compile times and stuff. And it is one of the most awkward things I think with Rust. And it is just the fact that the compilation unit is the crate, not a module. So when you change something just in like one place, it ends up recompiling the whole crate that it's in. But sometimes when you haven't started with a kind of like workspace approach, it can be hard to figure out how to separate those things out.
Yeah.
But then it can be really nice when you do. Like I had a different project that I was working on where I was using one of these like parser combinator crates. Not Nom Chomsky, but same idea as like Nom. It's where you like put together these different things to build a parser, and it does it all with generics and in the type system and stuff. And it got to the point where it was super painful to work on it because every time I changed anything anywhere in the whole project, it was like recompiling all those parsers. And then I was like, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to take the parser and put it into a separate crate. And then the incremental build times went from like 10 or 15 seconds down to like half a second because it was no longer recompiling all the parser stuff every time I changed something somewhere else. So it isn't always obvious. Like you would think it would be nice if the compiler could do more module level stuff like that, where I'm just working over here, but it's all in one big crate. Now it's recompiling the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how to split those up as dependencies isn't always super obvious. So what I've been telling people, right, is like with bigger projects, sometimes if you can like pull out, if you have a bunch of shared components and you can like pull the components out into a crate, and then if you have, you know, a feature where it's like, oh, here's the user dashboard and there are 4 pages under that, you can like pull that dashboard out into a crate so that when you're then working on something else on a different page, it's not like recompiling all that stuff. But it can be tricky to figure out how to do that, I think.
Yeah, what I did is I had like one crate, and I don't know if I like the naming convention or the naming that I chose behind it, but I have one crate which is essentially like a core crate, which is the entry point. So that's my main.rs, apps.rs, all my routes are in there, static assets, like all of this kind of stuff is in there. I have a little, I have a couple, like I'm using Sigma JS in there, and I didn't want to rewrite like all the was and bind gens. So I've got a couple of JavaScript files just filled with vanilla JavaScript in there, just to basically get that graph rendering going without having to deal with was and bind gen or anything like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've got like all that in there, and then I've got one which is like shared components, like components that I can just pull in to various different views that I have going on. Then I've got one that I was originally going to call routes. That was actually just going to be like the main routes of the application. But I ended up just calling that features. So there's like a graph view, and then that would be something, you know, if there's like a user profile administration panel, you know, that would be in there as well. Then I've got one for database, and I've got one for utilities. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, core like always gets recompiled when I'm changing anything. And it's something to do with, I've got it, you know, like it's something is depending on something else that's depending on core. So basically anytime I'm working in like the features crate or the components crate, which I am a lot, then it's always recompiling core. And core is the core crate is like the one that takes a while. You know?
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah. Well, and the problem, right? So I'm talking about parser combinators, right? Which, if anyone hasn't used one of these crates, then sorry. Iterators would be like a more common example, right? When you use an iterator, the type, it's like a type that's, you know, if I have some vec dot map dot filter dot flatmap dot map, it creates a bunch of nested structs with like nested generics, right? Like you've seen those really long chains of generics. It's like, oh, this is a map. What do I just say? Flatten, flat map, you know, whatever, like inside it. And that's awesome. Like the compiler, that's how it gets those sort of like zero cost optimizations of turning an iterator chain directly into like a for loop. Because it can do a lot of work on those things, but it's slow. And unfortunately, the awesome thing about 0.7, right, is that it like turned the entire view into something like an iterator or something like a parser combinator, where it snaps together all these pieces, and then the compiler can do this amazing optimization work. The unfortunate thing about 0.7 is that that's actually super slow. And so people have seen, it's really hard to figure out the sources of the different slowness. And like we've tried to ameliorate different parts of it, but kind of like anywhere that you have a bunch of components or a bunch of views and it has to recompile everything, the more complex that is, the longer it takes. So sometimes even breaking like the features crate that you have out into a bunch of things, that might help, like separate features or separate pages, just because it's just those incremental builds. Like if you're changing something in the graph view, it shouldn't need to recompile all the other features, but it does. This has been really interesting. This was all just by way of you saying that you don't have a demo today, but has turned into a very interesting conversation too. We have some comments
Well,
in
like,
the chat and stuff.
well, okay. So I mean, okay. Well, let me ask this: like, is there? I mean, obviously, there's no hard and fast rule of thumb, right? Like every project is different and
Yeah.
different in its maturity and scope and everything. But I mean, is there like, I mean, okay, for me, just I don't know, kind of just a philosophy of life, but this also informs my development as well. There's an old saying in jurisprudence, which is hard cases make bad laws, which basically means um, you don't start with like a very complex situation and try to form a law around it. You try to start with something simple and like get some basic laws in place, and then you just allow the complexity of law to emerge from there.
Mm.
And so for me, when I'm thinking about software, like doing anything really in software development is certainly no exception to this. I try to apply that as well, which is I never try to go straight to the complex solution. I try to actively keep things as simple as possible and allow complexity to emerge only when there's really no other way around it. So that being said, like I was like trying to keep the number of crates like in my project to a minimum and allow more crates that I'm like, okay, I really need this and I'm going to benefit from it. So and I ended up with like 4 or 5. And I don't know if that's a good number. I don't know if that's too few. I don't know if there should be way more.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what
yeah.
I mean? Like,
Yeah. So this is a really interesting point, and it connects with, I think this was Ari, right? TQW we whatever in the chat on YouTube, who wrote, "Do you think it's possible for the Rust compiler to change its incremental unit to be the module level instead of a crate?" And so the reason that is really hard, it might one day be possible as a kind of compiler optimization where if it sees that it can do this, it can do it. It would be a huge breaking change because a nice thing in Rust is that you can have modules that have cyclical dependencies on each other. So you can have a crate, and from one module, you can import a type that's in another module and vice versa. And coming up with an example of when you do that is hard, but you actually do it all the time, right? Like if you have some module here, and then you have your lib.rs and you have some other module here, it's totally normal for lib.rs to export something from this module and for this one to import it and to end up with these kind of like cycles of dependencies. And that's the thing that's hard to compile, because then you have to compile those all at once. You have to compile the whole crate all at once. Whereas with crates, right, when you break it out into separate crates, you can't quite do those cyclical dependencies, so it can compile them separately. But then the hard thing is basically that you have to start with a structure where your different pieces aren't depending on one another. So to what you're saying about the simplicity and complexity and hard cases make bad law, right? I don't know if you Rich Hickey was the creator of Clojure. I'm not a huge, there are Rich Hickey like fanboys, people who like kind of like Uncle Bob. There are people who are like very pro, very anti, guy with a lot of opinions. One thing that he says that's useful is he makes this distinction between simple and easy. And simplicity is when you have different things that are not woven together in a kind of interdependent way. And something can be simpler but a little harder. And to me, the like splitting things out into a bunch of crates is simpler but harder, because when you have several different crates and you can't be like depending on things across those, it's harder. You have to think about like, how can I structure this so that there aren't cyclical dependencies? How can I structure my code so that each thing only does like one thing? And it's actually harder to get started with that, which is one of the reasons that all of our templates and stuff have traditionally been like, oh, you can put everything in one crate. But then it actually starts paying dividends down the road. It's like harder to take something like, the complexity there isn't having 5 crates. It's having parts of your crate that depend on one another so that you can't then split them apart, if that makes sense. Maybe like a different way of looking at it. So if you start with like the idea of I'm going to start with 4 or 5 crates, it's actually easier to keep it that way than to go from one code base into multiple. But I also totally buy the idea that it's overkill to start when you're just starting out with the project. Like there's something to be said for not prematurely optimizing your compile times, for just building your thing, and then when you hit a wall, if it becomes a problem, to restructure. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. If somebody were to ask me, I mean, I don't purport to be like any kind of expert or anything, but like, if somebody would ask me how to approach that in the beginning, I would say wait till it becomes a problem
yeah,
and then deal with it.
yeah,
Like I would not. And I was developing like Leptos for so long before I even realized compile time was a problem. People were like complaining about it. I was like, what are they even? I don't get it. And then like once I was doing things that were a little more significant, and my project was growing and stuff. I was like, okay, now I get it. Yeah,
yeah.
this is kind of a pain. Yeah.
You can definitely over-engineer something when you're just learning and be starting out with all this complex stuff and not really need it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, totally, man.
yeah,
So that's cool. Okay, that's good to know.
yeah.
We already have some questions rolling in.
Awesome.
Um,
Yeah.
let's see. I think TKUE. I think we already answered that one.
Yep. Yep.
Let's see. I'll jump to let's see. Priyanshu asked a question, but I'll jump to Roman's question because I think it's on topic to what we were just describing.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. That
Mm.
was. Hold on. Here we go. Yeah, I just started learning how to use Leptos. I had an Accent backend project and wanted to integrate the code in Leptos. Was unsure about the data structure. Um,
Yeah. And this is, I think, a pretty common source of confusion with the kind of workspace setup is the question of like, where do my server functions go? Because I think the workspace itself, that setup has like a front end app and server crates or something. And you should almost think of it as like, if you want to actually start splitting stuff up, you need additional crates. Because the front end one is literally just compiling the WASM binary for the browser. And the server one is literally just compiling the server binary. And then both of those depend on the app one and get most of their stuff from that. So if you have other things going on your server, and you want to be able to like edit the server separately because it's also doing other stuff other than this Leptos app, then you can do that in the server one. But anything that is like app logic needs to end up in that app one. So people say, but where should my server functions go? Shouldn't they go in server? And it's, well, no, because you need to use them from the app, and server depends on app. App doesn't depend on server. So you can't put the server functions over in server and then call them from app. But then if you're thinking, okay, well, I actually want to break those out into something else, you could create like, you could split app out into UI and API or something and put server functions in API. It really is, I think it's one of those things, right, where like, the framework doesn't prescribe a way of structuring your code. I think that Leptos has very few opinions as far as how you're structuring your code, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad, right? Like there isn't an answer to the question, where should I put 50 different models? If you're using server functions, there's sort of one set of questions, which is, well, you need to be able to access, I assume those 50 plus models are like structs that define something. Well, you need to put those in a place where both the client and the server know about them, so the app place kind of makes sense. But if you're not using server functions, if you're just doing like some kind of a traditional API, you're making calls out to some other server, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, you just want to put those somewhere that both your server and your client can access them, so that they can share that communication. But then if you have special server side stuff, right? Things that only the server knows about, your database and so on, you can kind of put that in the, it doesn't, that can be hidden in some way. And we tend to do that with these like feature flags and things, because again, it's like those can't just live in that server crate if they need to be used in server functions. But if they don't need to be used in server functions, if you're defining some API routes or whatever, you can just put them in the server thing. So it's a little harder. There isn't like, here's the directory structure you should use. I guess some of the examples in some of the projects have some, ways of structuring things in different ways, but there isn't really a set answer to that. unfortunately. And it's one of those things that like the more detailed the question is, the more detailed the answer can be, I guess.
Do you just for you personally, like you personally, Greg? I'm curious to know about this. So I've kind of gone a little bit back and forth. I mean, I know there's multiple different ways to do this, um, but do you like to let your server functions live like inside your component files or anything like this? Like, or do you like them to be somewhere else?
Right. The thing I really like about that approach is it the I'm trying to figure out what direction I want to use. The vertical integration of these things, right? That like the separation of concerns by separating features, so
Yeah,
that if you have a component that, what would an example be? You're creating a Twitter clone, right? And you have the heart button or whatever. And so clicking the heart button is going to send a request to some API. If I were doing it, right, I would have view tweet.rs, right? And within that, there might be a heart button component. I might even put the send heart button request server function definition like inside the component, which makes it so that I can't actually call it. It's still a public API route, right? It doesn't actually make it private in like an HTTP sense, but it actually makes it so I can't then call it from other parts of my application. And then if I copy and paste that like button component somewhere else, it travels with it. So I kind of like organizing things by feature in that way. But other people hate that. And other people say my API should be in this separate API.rs and all my server functions are going to be there. And then my components call out to that. And that's fine too. But just me personally, right? Like I would tend to integrate things by feature, not by technology. And this is kind of one of the big shifts I think that's happened in the web dev world, say over the last 10 years, as opposed to the 10 years before that. There was a period where people were really into like separation of concerns, as in your HTML lives here, your CSS lives here, your JavaScript lives here, your server is over here.
yeah.
And I think with like the rise of, React and similar kind of component-based models, a lot of people have gotten into kind of like separation of concerns as in separation of features, because then you can be here, I'm working on this feature, I have everything I need for it is right here. But it's kind of like a different strokes thing.
I think it's kind of funny. I don't want to give too much personal information. A friend of mine that I used to work with, who was a developer, he was talking about how we should move all business logic should be like all of it should be completely out of the away from the component files, totally separated out. And I was like, well, isn't this at this point kind of a game of cat and mouse? Because we already had that before when it was just HTML and CSS and then business logic was somewhere else. And then we created this component structure where it can all live together. And then now the next thing is to then take the business logic out again and put it somewhere else. So it was kind of like, it's like HTML and CSS is like chasing the business logic around. And every time we get them all into the same place, we're like, oh, now we should abstract that out into this other place. It's like, guys, what's the whole point of this? To like have it all be able to live together in some way,
Right. Well, and it's like the grass is not in fact greener on the other side of the fence, right? Like it's just the same. So there are like different pros and cons, but when you're in the component world, you're like, oh my gosh, these components are so complex. I'm mixing together this like business logic and my view logic. And like, now I've got this, I'm setting this in the Leptos example, maybe like, oh my gosh, I've got this signal and then I'm like setting it over here, but now like I can't just call some plain method on it because it's a signal, it's wrapped, blah, blah. I want to go to this much simpler route. And then you go back to like you, right? So like not you, but YEW, the REST web framework, right?
Yeah.
You, before it had function components, like React style function components, it had, they weren't quite class components, but they were these like Elm architecture, like you've got a state and a message and a view, and it was all very separate and nice. And like they moved away from that, right? And it's like there's always this yearning for surely if we did this other thing that isn't the way that my actual code base looks, it would feel better. But then by the time you've rewritten everything into that other style, it still is just your actual human code base, and it's still kind of a mess. It's not like there's
Yeah,
nothing's better than anything else, right? That's such like a nihilistic kind of way of looking at it. But yeah, it is a little bit of a grass is greener thing.
yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, I don't know. I find just increasingly more is the more and more I develop software. It's just wait till something becomes painful. Wait till the thing to do becomes so painfully obvious that it's just dumb at that point to not do it. I don't know. That's like how I have kind of. That's the point I've arrived. The approach I've arrived at, I guess you could say.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. It's like wait for things to just become so painfully obvious, then you can be rest assured that it's probably the right thing to do at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, let's see. All right. Now let's go back to Priyanshu's question.
Mhm.
I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but I don't know. Somehow magically on streams, I tend to do pretty well with names. So I don't know. What is the one thing that Leptos does way better than any other for building web applications? Just
Um,
curious, is it performance, static typing, Rust UX ecosystem, or something, or everything above?
yeah, that's a great question. I don't, so I'm going to answer it without comparing to anything else, I guess. I'll just answer like, why would I spend a couple of years building something like this? I really, I really like Rust's particular combination of a very, very nice, so I'll say I think that the only thing that Leptos does way better than any other framework for building web applications is that it lets you write web applications in Rust without with the full spectrum of HTML on the server all the way down to clicking a button in the browser and it updates the count. So like the fact that you can actually do the thing in Rust. And the reason I like that, right, is that for me, Rust has the kind of perfect combination of really nice dependency management, a really nice testing story, a really great ecosystem of like very high quality packages that work well together that people kind of agree on. Like just the existence of like Sirti and its pervasiveness is like great. Um, and then all of that combined with some of the really nice features of like an ML family language. So things that came from ML, OKML Haskell, but the things that are like exhaustive pattern matching, enums and structs, this like type system that really helps you model relatively complex logic and domain stuff in a fairly nice way. Like I don't really need a lot of the performance aspects or the when I'm creating a web application, like that stuff is not as important, but then you also kind of get it for free. Like it's not quite free. Occasionally it's a little annoying. Oh, I have to deal with this ownership thing. But then you run the thing and it's like, oh, and now I have 25 times the throughput of the React version of my app. That's nice. And it's, so it's kind of like Rust is a really nice language. It has really nice tooling. And then Leptos lets me write a web application in Rust. And I'll just say I continue to write really stupid bugs in my JavaScript applications. I don't know if it's just that my TypeScript settings aren't tight enough. I had this insane bug that I, of course, shipped a couple weeks ago where I was refactoring from a closure, right, in JavaScript that was just like an arrow function that was just one expression, and it was a ternary, right? Because I didn't want to put curly braces 2 years ago when I wrote this thing, and I refactored, and I was like, oh no, I need to. This can't be a nested ternary. It's going to have two different if things, and so now I refactor it. I rewrite it to be an if else. I use the curly braces. I put the return in the else branch, which is what I'm working on. I forget to write return in the if branch. So now instead of returning the value, it's undefined. And it's like, I'm just too bad at writing JavaScript to be able to do that. And so I do it in Rust, which just wouldn't compile that. Or maybe I just need better TypeScript settings. I don't know. But it just saves me from myself. And then Leptos lets me use it for web applications. So that's what I think it does better than anything else.
It's just a skill issue, Greg.
It's a total skill issue. It's totally a skill issue. And but it's like, and of course, like it didn't get picked up by TypeScript because I don't know, I just have whatever default settings were on. And I wasn't manually testing. I was manually testing the other branch that I was adding, but I didn't go back and test the thing that already worked. No, I just didn't write return. And then I was like, SOL. So it's totally a skill issue, but like I need Rust to save me from my skill issues of JavaScript.
Yeah. I mean, I can take a stab at it as well. I mean, one thing that I definitely came to notice at some point when I picked up Leptos, which I look back on and I'm like, why Leptos? I think it was quite arbitrary, actually.
Yeah.
I think I liked Rust. And at the time, it was basically Leptos or you. It was super early on. And I don't know why, but I remember because I learned about Solid. And I listened to your Restation Station podcast, which strangely, I don't know why, he kept asking you about Elm for like 20 minutes during that podcast. If you go back and listen to it, I was like, dude, come on. They were talking about Leptos, but just going on about Elm. Yeah. It was a great interview. I've listened to that podcast like 3 or 4 times probably. But anyways, I don't know. I had an appreciation affinity for Solid. And so I was like, okay, I like Rust and I like Solid. So Leptos is basically like Solid for Rust, or at least that's what it was at the time. I think since then it's departed a little bit, kind of taking on islands and things like this. But one thing I think that probably is, I don't hear a lot and should be mentioned, which I think is, maybe you can shed some light on this, Greg, because maybe this is something, maybe I'm placing too much emphasis on this in my own mind, but kind of the appreciation for and adherence to web standards, like just the web platform. It's a feeling that I have that was that something that you actively chose to think about as you developed Leptos? Like, I want to stick to the web platform. I don't want to go off and turn this into its own thing, where it's like you're just living in Leptos land. And it's just totally abstracted away from the web platform. It feels like there's too much of an adherence to the web platform for it to not have been an active choice on your part from the beginning. So, I don't know. Maybe would you shed some light on that?
Yeah, almost to an obnoxious degree, right? So like I've been accused of being pedantic, right? The whole like prop value thing, right? Instead of just letting you like input value equals for like a controlled input would be a great example. Where my thing is always like, no, but that's not actually how the DOM works. So there are a couple of reasons, right? One reason I guess is, I mean, I've been writing HTML for like the majority of my life, probably 20 something years, and kind of web applications of different forms since middle school or whatever, the first PHP thing I did. And so I guess part of it is I just know it. Part of it is that there is such good documentation and such a wealth of knowledge about how to do things with web APIs and with the web platform. And it's also a really quirky platform. So I've always found, like when I was first exploring Rust web stuff, one of the first kind of issues, one of the first PRs I made for something was a framework that, was like a virtual DOM based thing. And it was kind of trying to paper over some more of those differences more. And it was like, oh, well, I just used this for an input and it was great. But then I used it for an option and it panicked. And like, how can we, and it was because it was trying to like abstract over some of these differences. And it's really hard to abstract over or to like create abstractions over the way that the DOM behaves that work or that don't challenge your assumptions. And sometimes I still get bitten by them. But yeah, I mean, so that was part of it. And I also just think I'm coming from the perspective of like, when I first, the first kind of application I was working on when I started developing some of the stuff that became Leptos was something that I needed to be able to use on a device that actually doesn't support JavaScript, like on an old kind of Kindle device. And so the the things like support for streaming HTML responses and the like progressive enhancement stuff with forms and things, that was partly just like, okay, I can get into the mindset of somebody who has a device that's so restricted that they can't actually do this. So how can we make things work as well as they can, and then do the progressive enhancement? Because I actually had use cases that that you needed that for, right? So just building on top of, that's why server functions are this like URL encoded post request, so you can use them with forms. That's why the streaming stuff works the way that it does, and why there are so many different options for the SSR modes and stuff. It's just like, I really believe in, I think, exposing the power of that platform to people, and then letting people kind of make decisions about how to do it, rather than just like, here's the happy path, but it only works one way, and if you want to do something else, you can't. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. It's very nice to just fall back on basic HTML. You know, if I don't feel like looking up how to do something in Leptos, I'll just do
Mhm.
it, you know, in HTML, you know,
Mhm.
and it works just fine. Um, and yeah, I very much appreciate that. Something else I was going to mention that I really like about, I think this is not just Leptos. I think this is probably more broadly just an observation about Rust in general. But something I've noticed is just the kind of personalities that the people that want to develop in Rust, and the kinds of people that those people are, I find to be much like myself in the way that they think. You know, um, me personally, I'm not the kind of person where I'm kind of like, oh, well, why do you need all that performance? You're never going to need that. And I'm like, well, why not? You know, like I do want that. You know, like I don't want to need it, and then now I don't have it. You know what I mean? And for me, it's like a principle of the matter. Like, yeah, I want to squeeze performance out. Like, yes, I want this to be perfect, or as perfect as I can get it. You know what I mean? Like, for me, it's like a point of pride and like principle when I build something. And I don't want to just kind of, um, you know, I'm kind of the opinion that people are like, don't pre-optimize. And I'm like, okay, well, I understand that. I get it. And I think that there's sense to that. But they almost don't pre-optimize to a fault, as if to say, like, I'm not going to pre-optimize because this isn't ever going anywhere anyways. You know what I mean? Like, if I honestly if I'm going to invest the time working on something, then I'm going to pre-optimize some things because I have a reasonable expectation that it's going to be needed out there in the world at some point, you know?
Mhm.
And for me, that's one of the reasons I chose Rust, and why I chose Leptos, and why, like, I'm always, you know, checking my Lighthouse scores, and like I'm bummed out when all of them are 100 except performance, which is at 98. You know,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
so, and I find that there's a lot of people in the Rust community that are also of that sort of mindset. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
Um, and I like that. I find myself at home around those kinds of people.
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, Greg.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there's the performance part of it. I think that there's also like the correctness part of it. Like
Yeah.
Rust community, Rust ecosystem as a whole is obsessed with, um, in a similar way to what I was just saying, actually exposing the warts of whatever underlying platform in a safe way. Like there's that famous Faster Than Lime article. I think the title is like, I want to get off of Mr. Go's wild ride or something. And it's a little outdated now, like some of the things like generics and so on that Go has added. But some of the things are just like weird APIs where Rust will return a result for something. So for example, I think it was something like, if you have a file name in Windows that contains invalid Unicode characters in the name of the file or in the path or whatever, right? And then Go just like removes them, and Rust will like return a result. And it's like, sometimes you actually just you want to be presented with the warts and the complexity and then asked, how do you want to deal with this? Rather than like, nope, 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 just pretend it's all simpler than it is. And I think that Rust focus on like doing the thing right, um, rather than in the easiest way. I don't know. It just works really well without those like non-happy path kind of cases.
Yeah, definitely. I've read a lot, how Rust forces you to level up as a developer. Um, I think a lot of people, like, they develop and then they just kind of like power their way through bug fixing. And
Mm.
Rust is kind of the opposite. It's kind of like, no, you have to do it right. Um, and then it's done, you know? And at a certain point, you just realize that you're better off just learning how to do the thing, instead of like throwing it together and then debugging your way out of it,
Yeah.
you know?
And there's also, I just think this question of like, there's a performance ceiling or a performance floor, whatever, with any technology that you choose, and it's not even premature optimization. It's like, what could I ultimately do if I needed to optimize this, right? Like if you were saying, okay, well, I'm going to start, my backend is going to be written in Ruby, and that's one choice you can make. And then if you have another choice that's like, my backend is going to be written in Rust, that's another choice you can make. And it's not a premature optimization to say, oh, I'm going to start with this in Rust. It's just like, you will hit a point where you can't push your Ruby server any faster, right? And so you don't have the choice to optimize, as opposed to the Rust thing. You can write sloppy Rust where you're just art cloning and blah blah blah, mutex is everywhere, and like that's fine, right? But then if you want to optimize it, you can. But you have the choice. Anyway, let's take some more questions.
DHH has entered the chat.
Oh no.
Let's see. All right. Let's see. This is another one from Priyanchu. Is there any feature, if added to Rust compiler, will improve Leptos or UI development in Rust?
Yes. So there's a proposal for having some way of distinguishing between objects that are expensive to clone and objects that are cheap to clone. So right now there's a clone trait, and you can clone an arc or you can clone a string, and those have very different levels of expensiveness. Cloning a string that's 20 kilobytes long is .clone. Cloning an arc that's incrementing one counter is .clone. And there's a proposal to separate that out so that reference counted things have kind of a special trait, and then to make it easier to move those into closures, and just automatically clone them. So all of the stuff that we do as far as providing these like copy like signal handles and so on would be totally unnecessary if that was added to the language, which would also mean that all of these occasional errors you'll get with signal, tried to access a signal but it was already disposed, that kind of error would completely go away. Any prospect of accidentally leaking memory would totally go away. So that would be a language change that would be a huge benefit. The only other ones, I mean, I can come up with other things. Variadic generics, which means writing a function that's generic over a tuple of any length. Right now, in Leptos and in every framework of different kinds, if you want to implement a trait over tuples of things that implement the trait, you pick some amount. So for example, if you have like an Axum handler and it has that kind of inline extractor thing where you can put arguments and then it will extract the arguments, that's implemented for up to some number of items, and then if you go one more than that, it's not implemented anymore. So that's another little language feature that would be handy. Would take a bunch of macro expansion out of our code. And then the real one is just it would help us a lot. Compiler performance improvements are the big one, and particularly for us, improvements to the performance of structs with a lot of generics on them, or her trait resolution, things like that would just be really handy. But I mean, the language is amazing and the compiler does amazing stuff. I think right now, the only real warts that I can think of have to do with compile times, which is a bummer, but we'll also hopefully just continue improving over time.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's move on. All right, so this is another one from Priyanshu. Man. I am learning web dev directly in Rust with very little DOM API knowledge, and I get most of things working in Rust, but I can't figure out how to use browser APIs in Rust and where I find it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to show you exactly what the answer to that question is. docs.rs/websys. WebSys binds every single web API. The bindings are automatically generated from WebIDL, which means they're generated from the interface definition language that's used. And you can find anything that you want in here. So if I were trying to use...
Is it every single browser? I thought it was only some. I thought it was like some subset of browser
I think they have
APIs
to
that
be
are available.
manually added, but it tries to have them all. So somebody give me, what's an example? Clipboard. So if I search clipboard, right? Navigator.clipboard is how you get the clipboard. So let's go to Navigator. Okay, window.navigator. I go to Navigator. I go to clipboard. It gives me a clipboard. I can write text, read with formats. And these pretty much map directly onto web APIs. So like you go to, how do I do this? And then you go to MDN docs and you get the clipboard docs. And you say there are methods, read text, write text. And then you're over in WebSys and you have a clipboard struct with methods read text, write text. And if there are multiple different formats for the arguments, like the JavaScript one will take different things, then it'll be different functions here, like read and read with formats or whatever. This is really important. Activating the right features on the WebSys crate that you need so that it actually appears, because it doesn't compile all of them automatically. And then sometimes you need to add like an unstable flag or something. But the WebSys is pretty comprehensive. If you want wrapped versions of things, a really good one for wrapped versions of things is Glue. So like if you want to use the console or add events, or, oh, look, they've got history, they've got files. I use Glue timers a lot. They've got worker stuff with web workers. They have storage stuff like for local storage. And these provide kind of more rusty wrappings for things, so that, you know, they have a local storage struct that implements a storage trait that has get and get all and set methods, right? So that's like adding a rusty wrapper on top of some web APIs. So that's Glue, GLOO. But those two things together give you certainly access to everything that you need is in WebSys, and then nice APIs for some of it is in Glue, or look at WAS and BindGen docs or whatever. Very little DOM API knowledge might be your problem too, right? Most of this is, how do I do this in JavaScript? How do I do this with web APIs? And then you just translate that into the WebSys calls.
So I think we had a question in the, I'm gonna find which desktop that's on. Hold on. In the 8, yeah. Any thoughts? Okay, so this is we could tie in one of the questions that we got in the Leptos AMA forum, which is any thoughts on WebAssembly getting direct access to APIs, web APIs, and no longer needing to use JS glue code? Is this even something that would be interesting? So, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understood it, so WebAssembly does not, I don't know if it does today or not, but like at least there was a moment in time in which WebAssembly did not have direct access to the APIs and had to kind of like go through JavaScript using glue code, right? Yep. And then I think at least Firefox has a plan in place to give WebAssembly direct access, so it doesn't have to doesn't have that JavaScript overhead. Where does so maybe this is more for the audience than for myself at this point, but probably now would be a good time to explain, like, how does WAS and BindGen fit into there? How does WebSys fit into there? And how does like all of this landscape come together, and how has it changed? I think is probably even the more interesting question is, how has that changed over the last 2 years?
Hasn't changed over the last 2 years is the answer. So the way that WebAssembly works in the browser, this is not the case for like WebAssembly, WASy stuff running on the server, stuff for any other context. There's been more work there in terms of defining more complex interfaces. In the browser, WebAssembly can receive numbers as arguments, and it can return numbers. And that is it. And so that actually might be an overstatement. Don't quote me on that. But basically that's all, right? It doesn't get other types. And so the way that WAS and bindgen works is it maintains a stack of JavaScript objects over in the JavaScript side, which is what the JS value type is, if you ever see it. And then it gives indexes into that stack over into the WebAssembly side. So it says, oh, this DOM element is the third item in our list. And then it does all the management so that to you, it looks like you're just calling APIs. You call some thing, you get some clipboard back, you call set text, you give it a string slice, it sets the text in your clipboard, and you don't need to think about it. And WAS and bindgen, so when you compile the Rust code, it will basically leave these holes for WAS and bindgen to fill stuff in, and then the WAS and bindgen tool goes in and puts in some glue, and then it generates the JavaScript side of the glue. But the awesome thing is you don't need to think about that. Like, you don't need to know. I don't need to know, as the one creating Leptos, if I'm just calling WebSys APIs, I don't really need to think about how that stuff works. The only time that you'll really notice it is that strings, like sending huge amounts of text from the WebAssembly side over to the JavaScript side, is slightly expensive, like is expensive in a way that can be measured in JavaScript framework micro benchmarks, but that you do not notice day to day as using it. And other than that, you don't need to think about it. So if they did that, right, if that eventually came, if you could natively do all that from WebAssembly, nothing about your Leptos code would change. Nothing about Leptos's own code would change. Presumably what would happen would be that WAS and bindgen and WebSys would switch over to just doing that without even breaking their APIs necessarily, and then everything would just benefit. So it would reduce some of the glue code in terms of needing to ship the JavaScript. It wouldn't really affect performance in a way that actually matters, and it wouldn't make anything easier for me, and it wouldn't make anything easier for you, put it that way. But it would be cool.
Yeah. I'm just looking through these comments and questions now. Let's see. Golly, there's a lot of chat tonight. That's good. Okay, Todd Meister. Greg, what is your view on dry principles when writing Leptos?
I'm assuming that this question is in terms of something like, oh, I wrote the same code 3 times. Should I pull it out into a component? Maybe. I mean, I've seen people really struggle with, holy smokes, what are the bounds on this generic component function that needs to take this thing and that other thing? And all it really does is wrap those things in one element. So like you have like some div with 18 Tailwind classes on it, and you want to turn that into a component rather than repeating it, so that now you're taking children and whatever. That's a pretty easy example, but I have seen people create some really complicated like generic function signatures and stuff for components in order to be able to reuse them. That's fine. It's sort of like your own preferences in terms of like balance for that, right? It's so for that level of reuse, whatever. I think that there's nothing wrong with repeating yourself. Maybe you want to figure out how to avoid, like how to make life easier for yourself when you need to change that. So class names are a great example of like, maybe you don't need to worry about creating some generic component so you can wrap everything in the same div, but maybe you want to pull that long string of class names out into a constant that you just can use from different places, so that if you need to change it, you just do it in one place. Like that's certainly a possibility. But there's nothing wrong with, like, if you have the same exact thing 15 times and now when you change it, you need to update it in 15 places, that's a good sign that like maybe it's worth refactoring it out. But if you see yourself do the same thing twice, should you then immediately sit down and spend 20 minutes pulling that out into some shared component? Maybe not. It's like anything else. I don't think there's anything super Leptos specific about it, apart from the fact that sometimes it's tricky when you're working with a rendering library like that to get like, okay, what are the trait bounds I need for this thing to actually work? Can be complicated. So it would nudge you away, maybe a little bit away from reusing some parts of that, but I don't think there's a like hard answer.
Yeah. Okay, this is a good question here. If Leptos didn't exist, what would you be using for personal projects to build a reactive web app?
Yeah, so I have applications that I still maintain that are written with Angular, React, although that one I was for a client that I don't maintain it anymore. Solid. I think Svelte 5 is quite nice. I haven't used it, but it's essentially solid in Svelte syntax. Solid's really nice. Any of these things are good. If Leptos didn't exist, I sometimes think like if Dioxys 0.6 had existed 2.5 years ago, would I have created Leptos? I don't know, maybe not. There are a lot of good options. Like I think, I don't love React. There are a lot of really nice functional programming languages for the front end, like Rescript or something, or ReasonML before that, which is like an alternate syntax for OCaml. But they all just use React for the backend, and I don't love the kind of React model. So I think that there are a lot of good possibilities. I'm kind of, I don't know. I don't have really strong dogmatic convictions about any of these things because I've used so many of them, and they all work fine. They're good. It's kind of like whatever framework works. Vue is quite nice, right? Probably I mean, if I were just answering, probably solid. But
Yeah, yeah. We could actually piggyback on that with one of the questions that came into the AMA forum, which is, what is your stack for 2025? So I think that person's question is not what do you use, but what would you use?
Yeah.
So maybe, okay, I will pin you down. If you had to choose one, what would it be?
If I had to choose one
can...
of all of those things, if I could only, if I were condemned to spend the rest of my life building web applications, or at least the year 2025, and I could only pick one set of technologies, well, I don't want to like pick one that I've never learned. I think I think my impression, right, is that Svelte and SvelteKit are in a very nice middle ground of maturity, good performance characteristics, nice with Svelte 5, nice mental model. That's something I'd really be interested in exploring if I were allowed to learn something new and commit myself to it based on what I know. Svelte and SvelteKit or Vue and Nuxt, they're sort of in this middle realm of. I think React has gone down interesting roads that aren't worth pursuing for the sorts of things that I build. But there are lots of, I don't know. I just got out of the question again. Fine, SvelteKit. That's what I'm saying. Fine, that's my answer.
Okay, all right,
Svelte,
yeah.
And then as far as, I don't know if the question was like what like developer tools and things do I use, right? I wasn't sure if that was like a what's your editor question or if that was a what tech stack would you pick for a project kind of question.
Yeah, we'll go with that. It's 2025. You decided, I'm going to shake things up a little bit. Or maybe it's not I'm going to shake things up. It's just I'm going to make some minor adjustments to my stack for a new project that I'm going to start in 2025. What's your stack that you go to? Obviously, Leptos and Rust. If you had to choose, I don't know.
Yeah, so if I were starting a new project, or if I ever get back to one of my projects that I should probably finish, but yeah, whatever. What would I do? I would do Leptos. I would use Axum. I would use Islands. I would probably use some of the kind of Islands client-side routing stuff I've been playing around with, which was going to be the demo. We have too many good questions. I'm going to do the demo another time because it's not that interesting. But so I would do that, right? And I would probably do a really basic data loading pattern of like load all my data up at the top, send it down to something. I think that you can, Leptos gives you a lot of power that sometimes moves you away from like simplicity. And so I would try to sort of do the simplified version of what we're doing with Leptos. But I think you can get a lot of mileage out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've kind of settled on, obviously, yeah, Leptos, Islands, Actix, and SurrealDB.
Mm.
Yeah, I've been developing on SurrealDB lately, and it's a lot of fun, actually. It's got like schema lists and schemaful. Um, so it's fundamentally a document database, but you can also enforce schema on it if you want to.
Mm.
So it's kind of cool because Rust is very, um, I guess you could say very particular, demanding, however you want to put it, with data models.
Mm.
And so you can just let SurrealDB just be schemaless, and it just kind of you can just let your business logic and your data models just kind of mold your database into whatever it needs to be. And then once you get set on something, then you can just enforce a schema over it, which is a lot of fun. And also been playing with Spin. But Spin, I don't think works with Actix and Axum. They've got their own server. But Spin is really cool.
Yeah.
They've got a really great free tier. I did a little bit of just like pro bono development work for this wildlife refuge in Africa recently, and I put it up on Spin on their free tier, and it's like, seriously, it's easier than Vercel. It's like 5 minutes, and you can have it deployed on a custom domain. It's so incredibly easy.
Yeah,
They've got SQLite and key value store. It's really, really quite a nice experience.
awesome.
Let's see. Todd Meister plainly disagree that Leptos and Rust is about writing for optimization. I'm wondering 100% with Greg on correctness of API. Okay, I mean, like, if I said it was about writing for optimization, maybe that was not the right way to put it. I think Greg actually rephrased what I was saying in a better way, which is it's more about not limiting yourself is probably a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. Can Leptos achieve? Let's see. Can Leptos achieve Svelte 5 like reactive approach, or is there some Rust-C something I think Rust-C can do to make UI in Rust better for both performance and US, or do we need to invent new architecture like Xylem is doing? Xylem? I don't know. I haven't even seen that. I don't know anything about that.
Xylem. Yeah. So I have lots of thoughts on Xylem. So I think it's important to say, right, that Svelte 4 and previous were great and had some fundamental limitations in their reactivity and some just broken things. Svelte 5 fixed those issues by adopting signals rather than their approach that tried to just do everything like syntactically with this plain JavaScript syntax and no wrapping types and whatever. So could Svelte achieve Leptos-like reactive approach? Yes, right? And like Svelte 5, the difference between Svelte 5 and all previous Sveltes is adopting the reactive approach that Leptos was already using, which we got from Solid and that's shared with Vue and so on. So that part of the question, it's also possible, right, that you're talking about the way that Svelte does its templating, not the reactivity per se, in which case, fine. I mean, Svelte is like a big proc macro. Svelte is a language that compiles to JavaScript that runs a compiler over everything. And so is it possible to do that in Rust? Yes. Would you like it? Probably not, right? There's a reason that nobody has tried it. And the reason is that, well, there are two things. One, it's really tricky to do. Two, it's really tricky to integrate with existing tooling. So like Svelte and Vue both had struggles for a long time when they had their single file component formats. It took them a really, really long time to support TypeScript because when you have your own compiler process running and transforming things, it's not actually that straightforward to integrate with existing tooling. So I don't think that if somebody wants to go and do a Svelte-like template format for a Rust web framework, I think that's awesome. That's not the approach I want to take. I like a lot less magic than that. And as far as inventing a new architecture like Xylem is doing, I think Xylem is two different architectures smushed together, one for its statically typed view tree, the other for its approach to reactivity. I think its approach to reactivity is pretty basically flawed, and I don't think anyone has been able to build. I think the Xylem team has been doing lots and lots of native graphics work, is where most of their focus is. In terms of Xylem's actual model of reactivity, I just don't think that works. It's basically just a special cased thing for event handlers, but like I've never seen an example with Xylem of a timer or something that's asynchronous. It just doesn't. I don't think that it actually works once you start building real applications with it. But the Xylem statically typed view tree architecture is very cool, is the basis of the rewritten renderer in Leptos 0.7, and is the cause of all my pain and compiler slowdowns due to that, but is still really worth it. So yeah, Xylem has been a big inspiration to me over the last year and a half or so. But I don't think I don't have as high of opinion as like of its reactive approach as of the renderer per se.
All right. Looking for more questions. We have one more question that came into the AMA, but I'm perusing the chat right now.
Yeah, go for it. I see one from Todd Meister about the why'd you make the Leptos view macro in HTML-like format?
Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
There's a really simple answer to this, which is I totally, well, there are two reasons. First, I should say I think I disagree with the premise of the question at the end here. Instead of what everyone else is using, I have used Angular, which uses HTML for templating, React, which uses JSX HTML-like for templating, Solid, which uses HTML-like JSX for templating, Vue and Svelte also use an HTML-like format for templating, and Vue uses an HTML-like format for templating. I don't get the what everyone else is using. I think by far the default is to have an HTML-based syntax for templating HTML in web frameworks. Some people don't like that. And the not liking it, I think, is the minority opinion. And I think that people pick way too much up on syntactical things like this. Like we have alternate, you can use the builder or you can use Leptos MView, which uses the curly braces, and they all expand to the same thing. Like these are not the essential differences between these frameworks, but I definitely think using an HTML-like format is the majority approach. And the reason for that, frankly, like I said, I've been writing HTML for 20 years. Yeah, so you like you had a follow-up, I was referring to Rust frameworks. Vue has historically been the largest and the most popular Rust framework. As far as I know, they use an HTML-like macro. And so again, like Sycamore and Dioxys use a non-HTML-like one, but they've historically been less common. But the other reason, right, is just that I've been writing HTML for 20 years, 25 years. As I get older, the number gets higher, I guess. And so that's just how I write HTML. So like if I'm trying to write something that's, it's kind of like just a syntactic familiarity thing. Like I like languages with parentheses around function arguments and curly braces more than I like Haskell syntax where there's just no punctuation and none of that, or more than I like Lisp syntax where there's 1,000 parentheses. And the reason is just that it's easier for me to read and understand instantly. I can look at a block of HTML in the view and instantly know what that is because I know what HTML looks like. And I just don't have that experience with structs and stuff. So I mostly just pick things that I like and then pick things that feel good to work with. So that's the reason, really. And I think it's continued to be the most widespread or I don't know, popular. I think my read is correct that that's the majority approach to templating. But I don't think there are disadvantages, right? Like there are some IDE benefits to having something with curly braces and just it looks more like Rust, and Rust Analyzer will let you fold it and stuff. Like that's true too. And so you can use an alternative thing that expands to the same exact kind of view if you want. Like the Leptos MView, to shout it out again, is a great library.
Yeah. Yeah, Rakshith actually has a great point. I mean, he says HTML has tons of resources and makes it easier to pick up. People don't need to learn another syntax. Yeah, I mean, I can see for sure arguments to both sides. I don't know. I can say for me personally, I just appreciate, again, going back to what we talked about earlier. I just appreciate the yeah, adherence to the web platform as much as possible.
Mm.
Um, but I could see why other people would like the Dioxys way and the Sycamore way as well. Um, let's see. I don't see any other questions, but we are at over an hour. We could go to kind of a non-development related topic, which is from the AMA, if you'd like, Greg.
Sure. Yeah. I see one more from Ari, one more from Priyanshu in here. So maybe while you're pulling those up, I'll just grab them. Can I put things into the?
You should be able to just hover over a comment and click show, and then it should just show.
Oh,
If not, I
it
will.
doesn't show up for me. Yeah. Can you put
Okay.
our TQ way most recently?
Oh, here we go. I see it. Yeah.
With,
yeah. They just posted these. Okay.
yeah,
Sorry.
with Leptos 0.7 being released, are you happy with its internal architecture and see it being somewhat in its final form, or do you see major changes being made in future releases? I see these things as two separate questions. One is, am I happy with it? And the other one is it the final form? So I think it's the final form. I don't see major changes being made in future releases. I see minor changes that are technically breaking. But those are things at the level of like, oh, we need to add this enum variant, or we need to change this way that custom error handling works for server functions or whatever, that are small things, nowhere near a rewrite of these proportions. This was, I mean, the reason this was such a huge release, such a huge rewrite, such a long process, is just that it was really taking everything I felt like I had learned over the 2 years before that and making it right. So this is the thing, right? And if you go into the 0.7 world, you will now know this is how it will work, right? I think we are on a path towards something that I would be happy to call a 1.0. This feels like it's the right paradigm and so on. Whether I'm happy with its internal architecture, I'm basically a tinkerer, right? So I will always like to rethink things and experiment with things and change things. That doesn't mean that I need to do that in the context of this framework, right? It doesn't mean that this is the one answer of how all web applications should work. But if I say, oh, I actually want to experiment with this other thing, I can actually go off and experiment with another thing. And I don't need to then say, and now everyone has to change how their Leptos apps work because I thought this other pattern was cool. So the plan is basically this is it. It's not like there won't be more releases, but the more releases will be things to kind of clean stuff up around the edges of this. But this is the model. And then, yeah, Priyanshu just asked, what's next for Leptos 2025, which was going to be the first thing I said, but I never got around to because we were talking about the crate stuff. What's next for 2025? What do I want to implement, which is first priority? So I'm giving a talk in February called The Future of Rust Web Applications. Sorry, I got distracted reading comments. The Future of Rust Web Applications will be at Rust Nation UK. And so when I look at that, what are the 3 things that are in the sort of future world here? This has sort of existed for a while, but not it's existed for a while, but people don't know about it or don't use it, is some of the hot reloading stuff that exists in both Dioxys and in Leptos, and being able to send, when you make updates to static parts of the view, sending that directly to the browser. So I think there are some small improvements around the edges there. It works pretty well overall. The other 2 big ones are code splitting. So splitting apart the WASM bundle into multiple pieces. That'll be part of, Ben has been doing a lot of work. Ben was sick today, so he couldn't join us, but Ben has been doing a lot of work on rewriting and updating Cargo Leptos. And on top of that new version, we'll be able to build in some of that bundle splitting stuff that already exists. And so sort of building out the right patterns for that is probably one of the early 2025 things. And then just working on, I've been doing some work. Well, maybe I will end with my demo because it's a short demo. And I know we have a couple other questions and stuff too, but I'll show you in this little demo. I've been working on some stuff with how do you enhance the experience of server side of an app with islands, right, where you're doing this traditional navigation where you go back to the server and then you just have little interactive bits. How can you kind of enhance that experience a little bit so it feels more like a client-side app, so that you get a lot of the benefits of the smaller WASM binary and the faster load times and the progressive enhancement without feeling like there is a big like you get kind of the snappy experience of the single page app, right? So I've been doing some work on that. But basically, I mean, the framework is kind of complete. I don't think that there are big missing features that I'm aware of. People always have little feature requests, but there's nothing. I don't think there's anything that you can't do that you could do with some other web framework. So getting here was a big push and a big lift, right? And took a lot of work and took a lot out of me over the last year or so to release 0.7. But I think it's kind of feature complete in terms of we're not missing some part of a web framework that you need to have. If there are things that we don't but we don't have this thing from Rails, or we don't have an auth solution, or we don't have a tight ORM integration, whatever. Those are things that are just out of scope from my perspective for the framework itself, but go ahead and build them. Yeah. So that's kind of that I think that's my answer, is that there are small technical improvements that, like getting the binary splitting thing shipped would be amazing. That would be a huge technical improvement over anything that's come before in WebAssembly land. It won't let you build anything differently. It will just make what you build better. So there aren't big, that's a huge feature in one technical sense and not really a feature in another sense, in that it won't really change what you're able to express with the library.
Yeah. Let's see. This is an interesting question from Roman. In a midterm view, will there be a more official ecosystem, or will it be like now with more community stuff? So I would assume this to mean, something like an official community or something like this. I'm not quite sure.
Right. So
Or
everything is community stuff, including the framework, right? There's not a company. There's not a corporation. There's a group of people, including me, right, who are just doing stuff, or not trying to sell a product. So there isn't an official. There's nothing to officially kind of bless stuff. I don't think that there are plans for something like blessing one component library as this is the Leptos component library. My experience of the rest of the web world has been that stuff churns really fast. A lot of what people experience as JavaScript framework fatigue is really JavaScript other library fatigue, whereas frameworks are pretty stable over time. And so I think that's again one of those kind of scope things. I'm totally happy to support community things. I think that there are interesting questions about is there a model for community stewardship of packages when people have kind of a hobby package they create that they disappear, they're not maintaining anymore, but other people are depending on it. How do we update this or that or the other crate to support 0.7? Maybe some kind of a GitHub organization for Leptos community stuff that people can add as a maintainer if they want to, so someone else can pick up and update a package. But no, there aren't plans for more officialdom.
Yeah, I think the stream is like the most official thing that we do, and it's pretty
probably
unofficial.
That's probably right. Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is more just a very technical development question. How does store works, like stores versus signals?
Yeah. A signal is a box you can put a value into, and then you can subscribe so that somebody tells you when things change. A store is a really big box that you can put a really big struct of values into, and then it will tell you when any of those fields individually change. So the trade-off is for relatively larger and more complex data structures, like a struct with 10 fields, you can just put the struct into the store without wrapping every field in an individual signal, which means it can be the same struct type, whether it's in the store or not. There isn't my struct and then my struct with everything wrapped in signals. And the trade-off there is there's a little more bookkeeping. It's slightly more expensive. It's slightly slower than just having a signal. But if you have a store with 10 fields in it, you can get individual reactive access to each one of those. So it ends up being better for your application than 10 different things where you're cloning all the fields or whatever. It stores one structure once in one place. So I would say stores, you should use signals for primitives, for plain data types, for ordinary stuff that you're passing around. You should really think about using a store if you have a struct with several fields, let alone nested data structures that you want to just have in one place and then access the individual fields ever actively.
All right, Max, I'm guessing the hot reloading won't work with the view builder API.
Correct. Because the reason you can't do that, right? We can analyze the view macro to see how has this macro changed relative to this other thing. To analyze all of your code to say how has this function call changed relative to the previous version of this function call. At a point, you just have to re-implement the compiler and do like analyze the entire thing, right? So it's a lot harder. It's a lot easier when we say every time you invoke the view macro, we keep track of that, and then we compare this old HTML to this new HTML. It's not like it wouldn't be wrong to do it for the builder API. It's not something that I have the capacity to do, but if somebody wants to explore it, go ahead and do it.
All right. Are you excited about the future of Web3 and distributed web technologies, or do you think it's all just hype?
I've been hearing the term for going on, what do we say, 6 or 7 years? When did that stuff start becoming big? I've never seen any use for it. So far, it seems to be hype. I don't think it's my opinion of that matters so much as product market fit for them. I don't think that there's a product that anyone outside the tech community cares about that anyone's ever built using Web3 technologies. So I don't know. I'm not in that world enough to have opinions about it other than as a potential consumer, and nobody's ever offered me anything that I would want to use that's built on those things. So I guess that's all.
There's been a lot of like larger companies that have been trying to use like NFTs for like loyalty programs and stuff like this, but I never seem to see it like percolate out into the real world, or I don't know. I was into Web3 like back in the day. Not really, not like into the not into like speculating and day trading, but I wanted to build a Web3 product because I thought it was genuinely like really cool. And I was like putting together a pitch deck, and I could not figure out how to not mention it in the pitch deck, which is like something that you should not do if you're trying to pitch something that you're building. You don't pitch on the underlying technology, generally speaking.
Yep.
You're pitching on a business case. And I could not figure out how to like pitch what I was trying to build without mentioning that the reason it was valuable was because it was being built on something. And I was like, well, something's really wrong here. So anyways, I don't know, but that was my experience. I was doing something that was in a space that was, it was in the ticketing space, and Songkick years before had already figured out that going up against a company like Ticketmaster is just a fool's errand. So anyways, I don't know. It was, I don't know. We'll see. I'll never wish anybody like ill will. I mean, more power to them. I hope they do well, but
yeah, maybe I'll just say there's a false dichotomy. I am not excited about the future of them. Like, I feel no excitement in my heart about the future of those technologies. That doesn't necessarily mean it's all hype, but I don't feel any excitement about it. Yeah. I feel the same. Same as Gen AI people. There's another question about generative AI here, right?
Yeah.
You know, I feel no excitement in my heart. I don't think it's necessarily all hype. I don't use any of the assistive type of AI coding things. They don't apply to the use cases that I'm doing. I can see how they'd be useful for some other use cases, but you know, they've occasionally. Some of them are really helpful for pointing out APIs that I didn't know about that exist in libraries that I can then go read the real docs for. But you know, yeah.
Yeah, I like Ramajan. I see him like tweet out every now and again. He's like, "We're 19 months into 6 months away from all of our jobs being taken." Yeah, like
Yep.
every now and again, we're 20 months into 6 months away from all. Yeah, it's like
Yep.
pretty funny.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, I tend to feel the same way too.
Yep.
I mean, you can't. I don't know. Yeah. Um.
I guess
Here's a good
the
question.
only genuine thought, sorry, the only genuine thought that I have on that point, right, is that any large language model is extremely good at producing plausible content based on past realities, right? So if you find yourself in a job or working on projects, paid or unpaid, where what you're doing is you're producing plausible seeming output that's very similar to lots of things that have been done before, then you might consider whether that's something that a large language model could do, because you're not really doing original work in a sense, right? Like you're doing something that's known how to be done, that's been done a lot before. But your value as a person is not based on your ability to spit back out stuff that's already been done. Your value as somebody who's working in a creative field is based on your ability to create new things. And so I think a lot of the misery people have in some kinds of programming jobs comes from the fact that they are essentially already working as if they are an AI tool. They're just doing things that churning out 1,000 CRUD pages, whatever. And that pays, right? Like that's the equivalent of a good factory job from 50 years ago, where you're getting paid good money to do something that's kind of just on the assembly line. And that's fine. But that's the kind of thing that AI might be able to replace. The kind of stuff that I write in terms of code isn't like that. And so if maybe you should learn some stuff or find some stuff that you want to work on that is not, people don't pay me to do this stuff. I get some sponsorships, right? But I'm not paid to do this stuff, right? It's stuff that I wanted to learn and wanted to have a passion for. So if you want to find something that isn't spitting back out stuff that's already been done a million times before to such a point that even an LLM can do it, then find that thing and do it, right? And whether that's in programming or otherwise, right? But that's the thing I really have to say about that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good take. Here's a good question. Otis asks, any upcoming hackathons from the Leptos community to look forward to? Now, I think the original intention of doing these monthly meetups was to build up to a Leptos conference that was supposed to have taken place this past fall.
Oh.
I think that was like this all got started a year ago, last December. Almost like probably to the week. And it was going to be called Leptos Conf, and I think the original intent was for it to be this past fall. And the short answer is yes, we would love to do something like that. The longer answer is the question of when and resources to organize something like that. I know me personally, like this past year, I had to look for a job. I had to move like from Germany to Australia. Like I had really no time. I wanted to do basic things like clip content out of the monthly meetups and like post it once a week on the YouTube channel. I really didn't even have time for that,
Yeah.
So, but now my life has settled down a bit. I would like to do some basic things with this. Like I would like to buy like, a halfway decent microphone and like try to make this stream a little bit higher quality, maybe post some clips. And yeah, if we could actually try to build up to some, not a full scale conference, I don't think, but some sort of small event, that might be cool. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Greg?
Yeah. And if anyone wants to organize stuff, just, let me know. I think that's great. I think distributed things like hackathons work well. You know, it's again, right. It's one of these things like I don't have the time to do it, but I think it's great if somebody wants to. I'm totally happy to support it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, reach out. And I'm happy to. I would love help as well. So, yeah, I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job with this just as it is.
Right.
Yeah. So let's see.
Leptoberfest, yes.
Leptoberfest.
Sure.
Yeah.
So on this question, has anyone published any actual in production code for Leptos? I'm unclear on whether this is anyone using it in production, or has anyone published like as an open source repository, here's my production use. If the question is anyone using it in production? Yeah. And I usually don't know about it, or I know about it afterwards, or I know about it because there was an issue that like shook me to my core existentially a couple weeks ago, because somebody opened an issue and I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, it looks like it's a false positive warning. It's giving you like, do you want to work on a PR? And the reply was like, well, I'm using Leptos at work and management really is focused on new features and not like fixing bugs in Leptos. So like, maybe not. And I was like, oh, right. You're using this because your manager says you have to use it and you're filing an issue because it's annoying you. That is so different from the mindset that I came into this with, which is like, this is just a fun open source hobby project. So yes, there are people using it in production for actual businesses. I don't always know about it. One of the cool things about web technology is, right, you can kind of keep your stuff a little bit secret. And yeah, Rakshith put a link to, although I don't actually see the link that you put to what was built on Leptos. Did you actually put the link? You said all built on Leptos, but you didn't actually necessarily link what. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I just don't see it. But yeah, there's stuff using production. There are companies who have reached out to me. There are companies who have hired people from the community. It's definitely being used in production. Has anyone taken their proprietary code that's powering their business and published it as an open source repository? I don't think so.
I have access to a very a site that's running production right now. A full repository, and I think it's public, but I would not feel at all comfortable without clearing that first with the person who created it.
Exactly.
But yeah.
I
But
think
I
it's
would
one of
ask
those
them, I
things
want
that,
to have them on the stream. I've been wanting to have them on the stream for like 6 months. They posted their site in the showcases channel.
oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's like a. Ironically, you know that site that always goes viral like every few months. What is that? McAllister Tools or McMaster Tools? That's it. About like how fast it is or whatever. This is like a motorcycle shop in Germany, like an online store. And dude, their site is so ridiculously fast. It's crazy. This Leptos site, and it's like an e-commerce site essentially. And it's freaking awesome. It's built on Axum. It's built on SurrealDB. And I've talked to the creators of this. There's two German guys, and I think they're German. And they said they would come on and like talk about it, but it's just been scheduling, and I haven't been able to get them on.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and they sent me the link to the repo and let me have a look at the code, because I was asking them some questions about SurrealDB, and they were like, "Oh, hey, go check it out." So
Nice.
yeah, there are some like very non-trivial projects running production, and perhaps maybe also publicly available code.
Yeah, well. I think that's the case, and I think that it does tend to be the thing, right, where I hear a lot from people who are in the beginner and the learning phase and stuff about the small things that they're working on, but there are people who are just quietly using it for whole applications, right?
Yeah, totally. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, okay. We already talked about the Gen AI stuff and O3. See a lot of people being worried about their careers. I'm not overly bothered. I don't think anybody should be. I mean, if you're genuinely bothered, it's probably for good reason. And if you're not genuinely bothered, it's probably also for good reason. About Gen AI taking your job. Blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Would building state management, let's see, blah, 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 like stores make sense for Leptos?
I don't know. Here I'm furiously Googling NGRX stores. Oh, it's Redux, but built on something else with RX. It's Redux with RxJS. Cool. Sure. Yeah. Why not? You could build it on top of stores. Totally. Is that a good answer? I mean, I've
Yeah,
used very similar technologies. You can do something like Redux or something like NGRX stores, build it using stores. There's nothing built in to do that. Rust, almost in a weird way, gives you the things that you need, which are like pattern matching and enums, and you can just do that. Stores do support enums in a pretty nice way, and so you can build an entire uh, state store like that using stores as they exist, Rust, structs, and enums, and pattern matching. Yep.
yeah. Killer Coding Endeavors says about Gen AI and O3 says completely misleading and adding to learned helplessness most of the time. Let's see. Blah blah blah. Let's see. AI doesn't know Leptos 0.7. That is correct. ChatGPT will still tell you to use create signal instead of signal, for example.
And probably like context or scope everywhere, right?
Oh,
That
dude, yeah, it'll
yeah.
still tell you to use like
Hey,
context and
it
scope
knows
and
we
all this
exist now, though,
nonsense.
which is crazy, right? But two years ago, it would have told you had never heard of the thing. So very cool.
Oh, dude, I remember in our chat in Discord, like our private chat or whatever, like I posted like a chat GPT response and it was like Leptos is a Python library
Oh
for
yeah,
doing web development.
yeah, that was
So it
awesome.
couldn't be more. Yeah, totally.
Right. So I just searched in ChatGPT, how do I send a form request using Leptos? And it's wrong, but it sounds good. Yeah, it's really bad, really wrong. But it's a mix of things that used to be right and things that have never been right. Oh my god, and things that are totally made up. This is crazy. Sorry, you all can't see what I'm doing here. Maybe I'll actually just put it up on
Yeah,
screen
dude. This would actually
because
be a
it's
really good exercise. Is like
yeah,
tearing apart Chat GPT's responses about Leptos. That would be
yeah.
really productive.
So let me pick the right thing. This now we're just into fully fun mode. Sorry to anyone who had real questions. Okay, how do I send a form request using Leptos? Right. Make it a little bigger for chat. Okay. In the Leptos framework, a form request can be sent using its reactive utilities and server-side integration. Damn, good. Leptos provides tools to manage blah, 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 handle validation, nope, and process server responses seamlessly. Beautiful. Here's a guide to send a form request. Set up the server function. That's pretty cool. It's like Leptos, server function, nice. Serve annotated functions. These can handle form data processing and respond accordingly. Sick. Example, use Leptos server, save form data API, save form data, CX scope. Nope, never. That has never ever been the case that you would have scope argument in a server function. It used to be the case that you would have it like everywhere else. So that's wrong.
Yeah.
Nice. This is good. Okay. Okay, cool. That was bad, but it was good. It does take these arguments and do that logic. Create the form.
Also, the import's wrong too. If
Yes, it
you're on
is.
0.7, it's use Leptos
Oh,
Prelude.
for sure. Yeah. No, we're most people are still on 0.6 by crates.io downloads. So we're giving it the benefit of that on that. So this was up until version 0.5 was released, which was 15 months ago. So this is 15 months old, right? The CX everywhere. Okay, handle submit action.dispatch. That, okay. I wouldn't do it this way. Event target value. See, like it's so weird, right? Because like some stuff it's right, but then some stuff it's wrong. Like this, right? This is wrong. This is not reactive, right? In value equals email.get. That's not reactive. So it's kind of like show success or error message, some response. This is legitimate. This is a weird thing to do. If you ever find yourself in this situation, don't do that. Use some and none maybe, or you could do a map,
Yeah.
right? So instead of if let some response and then else this, just do submit action.value.get.map, right? So like, okay. So, and then this is totally made up, right? Completely imaginary. So again, right, like this is because it's not a super common framework, right? If it's doing React code or whatever, it's going to give you something better than that, and that's cool. But like, yeah, I mean that sucks, right? The problem is that it's plausible, but it's wrong, and it's not obvious what's the difference is between those two things, because for the LLM, everything is hallucination, right? It's just that some of it is plausible and actually correct, and some of it is plausible and wrong, and it has no way of distinguishing. So that's kind of the limit on uh, on that, I think.
The thing is though, like some of the most God, I don't want to use super negative words like destructive or damaging or whatever, but I mean, some of the most difficult to work with people, not just in development, but just in general, are people who are just confidently wrong. And I feel like that's a lot of times the case with Chat GPT. It's like I would rather it just tell me like I don't know, or I think this is how you do it, but I could be 100% wrong. But instead, it launches into this long, highly confident explanation that's wrong. And
And that's
you know,
not
you know,
reproducible, right? That's not reproducible. That somebody can ask it a question and it will give a highly confident wrong answer, and somebody can ask it a question and it will give the right answer with the same level of confidence. And now two people just think two different things, which in a technical setting is fine because ultimately the compiler is going to tell you which one was right or whatever.
yeah,
But in like a general world setting is actually terrifying, because like I saw somebody share on social media like oh, one of the kids in my history class searched this thing and Google now puts its AI results at the top of the page, right? They showed me this Google result that was just totally wrong, right? Completely imaginary information about a factual event. But then if you search it later, it gives you the right answer, right? It's like you can't reproduce. It's like we're literally seeing different versions of reality because they're both totally plausible piles of slop, and one of them just happens to be a delicious soup, and one of them is garbage, right? So anyway, I'm sure I have more opinions about it. I actually need to run pretty soon, so I'm good for like one or two more questions, and then I got to go.
okay, no worries. I think this is probably a pretty good one. Priyanshi says, advice for high school student want to build tools like text editors or video editors from scratch. I've built some small games. I don't know. Greg, do you have anything for that?
The advice, the not advice but comment is that's awesome. Who that person, whether that's you or somebody else, that is, I will say you as if you're talking about yourself, right? You are in exactly the right place. Like that's exactly right. I want to mess around with stuff. I want to hack on things on my computer. I want to learn about interesting areas like text editors. Video editor seems a lot harder. Just start building something small, right? And have it be not very good, and learn how your small, not very good thing works. And, you know, think like, okay, I want to build a text editor. How would I show text on the screen? And then how would I edit text? And then just like add small things and learn how something works. I think there's a huge amount of value in building mediocre versions of really common things so that you understand how they work. Build a programming language, and build a little type checker for it, and don't plan to ever use it, but do it so that you understand how things work. And I think particularly if you're a high school student or a college student, that's like the great time to be able to do that stuff when you're not trying to work, but you can just like learn, right? That's make a little front end framework, right? Make a little front end framework in JavaScript or in Rust, figure out how that works. Make it as bad as you want, right? But like learn how it works.
Okay. Someone wants to make your Greg. Todd wants you to make this a series. Greg snarks up Chat GPT Leptos code and shows you how it's done. That's great.
That's
That'd
actually
be
a really
really good.
funny idea.
Yeah.
I need to get back into making some YouTube videos and stuff. I had a while where I was doing videos and that was great. And it's all time constraints. Maybe this spring,
Totally.
now that if I'm not working quite as much on code parts of the framework, maybe I'll get back into a little of that stuff. But I think it would be fun. That'd be pretty funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say quick, since you have to go. There's like one or two more questions I want to hit,
Yeah,
and I'll
please.
just say to everybody, if we didn't get to your question, I will do my best to go through and and copy all these questions. And next month we will try to hit them all.
Awesome.
We had a lot of awesome, amazing questions in this month's chat. Um, and I just want to say thank you to everybody. It
Yeah.
is so much more fun when people are asking questions and we can interact. And I will do my best to carry these over to the next month so that they don't get missed. But
Awesome.
I'm going to cherry pick a couple that I think are thematic with this month.
Mhm.
Um, okay. Um, do you have any unexpected regrets in 0.7 in regards to send sync issues that popped up? And do you think send wrapper will be something we'll be stuck with as hack?
Yeah, sure. So this was, I wouldn't describe it as popped up, right? I would just say that there's like this weird thing. I kind of wish that WAS and BindGen would reconsider this policy of marking all JS values as being not send, because it's a huge pain in the butt. And for the most part, people's WebAssembly code is not multi-threaded anyway. So I think from the perspective of correctness, right, they are correct that you cannot send those things to another thread in JavaScript and expect them to work. But it is a total pain, and it has been for Rust Web Framework stuff for a few years. Do I regret making those changes? It would have been easier in some ways if we didn't make those changes. But it's one of those things, right? It's always a question of whether you should unlock things for people or whether you should lock them down. And sometimes when you unlock things, there's a little bit more boilerplate, or it's a little more awkward API. And the unlocking here, for example, right, is the main reason to make the reactive system send sync, which required these bounds on things, is because in Axum or in another framework that uses Tokyo in its normal mode, where it does the work stealing executor and will move things between threads, they need to be send in sync. So previously, we literally just pinned all Axum requests and responses to a single thread. So you didn't have the choice that you wanted to use the default behavior of Axum and let Tokyo rebalance that work across threads. It was all pinned to the thread that the request came in on. This version removed that gunk and boilerplate we stuck into Axum. It unlocks the ability to actually use the reactive system across threads. In exchange, if you are using non-send types, it puts a wrapper in that sometimes you have to put in one or two extra method calls or some other awkwardness. And I wish that awkwardness wasn't there. Like I wish, and it's usually around JS values, which you can't even construct on the server. So I wish that they just didn't mark those as being not send, because it does create that awkwardness. But no, I don't regret it. I mean, it was the right decision, in my opinion. Sometimes I think there are decisions that make the end product better that are unpopular for different reasons, and that's sad. But I think it was the right call. It would be the previous way of doing it hides the ugliness away from you as the user, but it forces it on you. And this puts it a little more up in your face, but it unlocks that potential. So, and I don't know that it's even right. So if WAS and BindGen would relax that not send thing, we could take out all those send wrappers, right? Because they're almost all for JS values. So that would be the way out of that workaround or hack, I guess. So maybe we won't be stuck with it forever. But
All right. Okay. So we got two more quick questions. One of them should be, but they both should be really quick.
Mhm.
The first one is, and you kind of already answered it, but I think somebody during the show submitted this into the AMA form, so I think it's probably worth answering. Specifically for you, Greg. You clearly created a sophisticated framework that many people embrace. I wonder how you financially benefit from it, if so.
Oh, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I have some GitHub sponsorships. I've had a couple of people who are in corporate or commercial settings reach out to say, we would love to offer you a little larger sponsorship. That's fine, but I don't. There's, I really value the work of sponsorship. So I, as part of my working life, I do some contracting work. So some of the JavaScript apps and stuff I've talked about, those are individual contracts for different people. So it's able to replace some portion of that contracting work. And so I can spend time on that on Leptos instead of making apps for other people or whatever. But I don't really benefit. There's no business plan. I don't want to benefit. It's really important to me actually that I and you, the community, never reach a place where it feels like there's a commercialization of that relationship, where there's any feeling that, oh, you're just working on feature X because you run a hosting platform and we'll pay you for that, right? I just want it to be, this is a technical artifact. So yeah, that's the answer. There's no commercial plan. There's no business plan. There's no product I'm working on that I'll be unveiling that has to do with Leptos. And that's kind of an important value thing for me.
There's not Leptos Cloud in the pipeline, Greg?
I don't have plans to do anything that's like that.
Yeah. Okay. So last question. This is a good last question for 2024. Hobbies and interests outside of writing code. I recall Greg talking about D&D in the Discord server. Ever look into something like Warhammer 40K?
Nice. Yeah. So I mean, not everyone realizes I don't have a full-time day job where I'm a programmer. So in part, it's because this started out as my hobby, and my fun, relaxing thing that was not work. And I do have other hobbies. I also have a 7-year-old, which means I've spent a few years having really work and childcare and family stuff being my main commitments. And now she's getting to the point where we can have like shared fun hobbies. So the D&D thing, right? One day I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll work on a PR to fix that bug. And then I think I said like, nope, I'm actually going to go and we're going to do some Dungeons and Dragons, because my kid really likes like monsters and dragons and spooky stuff. And we've been playing Dungeons and Dragons together with my wife, the three of us at home, and it's super fun. So yeah, I will probably maybe be doing an adventure tonight at home. I also am a big cook, so I'm pretty excited. We're having like our Christmas dinner today. So I'll be doing like a big roast and vegetables and stuff and doing that. And I also run a lot. So those are kind of my main things. But yeah, the programming stuff started out as a hobby for me. And sometimes it's like other programming doesn't feel like work. Like this Leptos kind of feels like work to me now. And so sometimes I'll just work on other cool stuff that I'm excited about. That's like a fun stress relief. I'm working on a programming language, and sometimes the problem is then you work on something that's a fun stress relief project, and then you release it to the world, and then if people want to use it, it becomes work. So you have to keep these secret things for yourself. So I won't talk about the programming language part. You see me post about it in off topic sometimes. But yeah, so I mean, that's a lot of it. I spend a lot of time with my family, and I spend a lot of time with communities outside of the programming world. And then I spend a lot of time occasionally with all of you. And I would just say, like, I think that was probably the final question, right? I just want to say to everybody in chat and everybody watching, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate all the questions and all the conversation. Thanks, Luke, for running it. But yeah, you're all great. I really enjoy getting to know people from all around the world with different levels of experience and stuff. I always think it's crazy to walk out of a place like this. We don't have Ben with us today, but to be like, okay, so Luke's in, on the other side of the planet right now. Ben is on the other side of the country. There are people watching probably on the other side of the planet in the opposite direction, right? And in the chat. And it's just amazing to have a community of people who are overall like a super respectful and healthy and kind and helpful community of people all around the world, united by wanting to use something that I created for fun. So thank you all for being awesome. And thank you for an awesome 2024. And I hope 2025 is also a great year.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. All right, everybody.
I'm going to run. See you all later. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you all in 2025. Later.
Take care, everybody.